Hey guys, welcome back to another tier list video. So YCS Bologna, however you pronounce it, just happened. I'm actually recording this literally the day after the YCS is wrapped up, and this should be up the day after today. And some stuff happened. The format hasn't changed a whole lot, but I think some things have kind of pivoted or altered. I haven't done a tier list video since AGOV, and since then we've had the Rarity Collection, which has made more cards more accessible to acquire. We had Valiant Smashers, which was a joke of a set, but I think we do need to address Centurion specifically. And then we've had Fire Kings just come out. So, yeah, I think we need to talk about this format. Again, it's not super different, but things going forward have changed until we most likely get a ban list very soon. But we're going to start with just the most powerful decks in the format. Those decks being wherever they're at. We, of course, have Pearly being tier 1, Tier Lament, Tier Horus, the regular tier build or the build with like 3 Imseti and the Sarcophagus and Happy, I think. Both builds are fine. They're both tier 1. It's just more of personal preference, I think, when it comes to the Horus stuff. But also at the same time, Imseti's like $60, so some people don't have the $180 needed to run that engine, especially since tier by itself is already a pretty pricey deck. But yeah, both decks are tier 1. They both basically do the same thing with like a little different, a little variance, a little change in the matter. Unchained, still one of the best decks. Rescue Ace, one of the best decks. This, when I put Rescue Ace here, I of course mean Simple Spoils, because the Diabell Star engine is just one of the best things that Rescue Ace has ever seen. And then where is our last contender for the tier 1 slot? Labyrinth. Labyrinth had an amazing and insane turnout at the YCS. I think all this deck really needed was it needed representation, which it hasn't been getting for the last while. And now that it's finally getting the representation, people are realizing this deck is a deck. So much so that like Joshua Smith cited Denko Sekka for this, but also, I mean, it works for Unchained and Rescue Ace because Denko Sekka just prevents them from activating their set cards, and preventing Unchained from activating Escape is quite good. But yeah, so those are kind of like the 5 like best decks in the format. Moving on, let's talk about the deck that won the whole YCS. Joshua Schmidt's Bystial Runick. This man played the stock market like crazy and doubled the price of Guiding Quem overnight. Bystial Runick, I think, is still like a tier 1/5. Despite it winning the YCS, I don't think it's the best deck in the room. It does have its shortcomings. I just think Joshua Smith, being a very, very good player, played it very well. He also, from the sounds of things, had really good matchups because Runick destroys Labyrinth. And he was able to, in the last few matches, go against Labyrinth a couple of times. Then we have to talk about Centurion. So here's the thing, and I will die on this hill. Centurion sucks. This deck relies off of dumping out Calamity and preventing your opponent from playing the game. And if Calamity gets banned, Centurion just sucks. This deck just doesn't do anything impressive other than Calamity Lock. So, unfortunately, I kind of have to put it like a tier 2 strategy. This is like my own, I guess, personal bias. I think this deck is just genuinely bad, and if they can't do Calamity, they don't do anything overbearing or impressive. That's really where I'm going to leave it. It did get some toppings at the YCS, but again, I don't think it did anything crazy impressive. It just summoned Calamity and won the game. Vanquished Soul. Vanquished Soul had some tops. I'm going to put it in tier 1.5. This deck is crazy good. The problem is the deck does rely too much on certain attributes being in your hand, so you have to do proper deck building, but even then, some of the cards are just not searchable, like Stake Your Soul being the best card in the deck, and you can't search it unless you have like Thrust or 1,000 draws. So the deck has a lot of shortcomings, which is what prevents it from being one of the best decks in the room, but with a good pilot and a small ounce of luck, this deck is crazy. Dragon Link, I think also got some top 64 toppings, like 1 or 2. The deck's still good. I think Chaos Space being at 1 hurt the deck more than everyone thought it would. Magnamut being at 1 hurt a lot. because just the constant search power is very helpful. But also at the same time, the Bystials have moved on. They're onto the Runick archetype. Who needs all these other Chaos Dragons? Like, come on. That's such old news. But no, D-Link is still a very viable deck. It's just slowed down a little bit by Chaos Space and Mag being at 1. Well, the jig is up, everybody. Makonko is not that great. Makonko doing its Acid Golem stuff, everyone's kind of onto it now. We've kind of figured it out. I think it's still a viable strategy. But people have just kind of figured it out, and it's not scary anymore. So I got to put it in tier 2. I don't think it's Rogue yet, but it's getting down there. For hire, Runick Sprite, it's still a tier 2 strategy. This deck hasn't changed, hasn't done anything different. It's not doing anything crazy impressive, but it's also still existing. So Runicks are just kind of, I think Runick in general is just in a really good spot in this format, because there's a lot of like back row stuff, and just target negation is a really good thing right now, and that's something that Runick does very well. So yeah, I think any deck playing Runick is doing really well right now. Tier 2 though, I don't think it's I think, Bystial Runick is probably the best form of Runick right now, but this is still very viable. Rika Sun Avalon, I mean, if your name is Jessica, you're doing very well. But Rika Sun Avalon it's just a deck. I keep saying that this deck does not do well under heavy hand trap formats, and then it just kind of continues to get tops. The deck hasn't changed a whole lot, but it is getting some, I believe, Aromage or whatever support in one of the upcoming sets next year, and because they're all plants, it's kind of like dinosaurs or dragons. If you get a monster of that type, you're going to look at it and see if you can do something with it. That's basically, oh, these are plants. Let me try and shove it in Rika Sun Avalon pile. Salamangreat. I don't think we actually saw any toppings with Salad this time around. I think Salad's just kind of getting a little outpaced right now. And because of that, I kind of have to put it in tier 2. There's just a lot of decks doing better things right now. Salad just kind of has like one route, maybe 2, and it's not doing anything crazy impressive. And Fluandrees is kind of the same thing. Fluandrees, it's just a floodgate deck. M-Pen's a floodgate, essentially. The trap cards are floodgates. Harpy's Featherstorm is a floodgate, essentially. The deck can run Rivalry if it wants to. Everyone just kind of figured it out, and also Artifact Lancea is a thing. The only thing this deck really has going for it is that it can run Shifter and not care. I'd have to put it in tier 2. We didn't see any toppings with it at the YCS, I'm pretty sure. Runick Plunder, Rogue. I think this is probably one of the weaker Runick strategies right now, just because Plunder, as good as a deck as it is and as fun as it is, I don't think it really has a home in this format currently. So Dynamorphia, I said it in the last tier list, that topping at YCS Richmond, I think is what it was a fluke. This deck didn't do anything impressive. I don't even know if it had representation. This deck is good. It's just It's not doing anything crazy impressive other than setting 5 and fusion summoning on your opponent's turn, and then hoping they can't get over Rex. So Dark World, Droll, Shifter are a thing. Both are being run in the format currently. So, I mean, you can still play this. You're going to see some toppings at a regional possibly, but it's going to be a struggle if you see Droll, and it's definitely going to be a struggle if you see Shifter. Don't bother with Synchrons. It's not a good deck. I mean, it can Calamity Lock with like 20 more steps than Centurion. So if you're if your entire end goal is to Calamity Lock, just play Centurion. If you're trying to do like literally anything else, you can play Synchron, but you're gonna lose most likely. Chimera, branded Chimera. I believe we actually did see a couple top 64 of this. Yeah, there were, out of the branded decks that were in top 64, branded Chimera had 2 toppings. I think this deck is still very playable. It's very viable in this format. It does a lot of cool stuff. I think the deck needs to adapt more, and also with the new illusion support coming out in Phantom Nightmare, this deck could be crazy. However, it runs out of engine a lot quicker than most scenarios. Like, it runs out of Berfamets and Gazelles very fast. And if you don't have ways to get them back into the deck, you're just going to kind of thin out your deck and have a bunch of cards you can't use. But we're going to skip some stuff and talk about Branded, because Branded Despia made it to top 4, and then he bricked 2 games in a row. That was unfortunately very sad to see, to witness. Well, he didn't brick game 2, but it just didn't work out in his favor. Pure Branded, I have to say, does more impressive stuff than Branded Chimera at the moment. So we kind of have to put it higher. Puppet Lock is still a thing. This deck still does stuff. And now that Quem's like $70 to $80, this deck's going to be even harder to pick up. This deck was already somewhat like expensive. Branded by no means has been a budget deck, especially with like Cartesia and Granganol being splashed in a handful of things. But I don't know. These two could be swapped either way. Pure Branded or Branded Chimera could be better than the other. Tier 1.5. I know I've been putting Branded in Tier 2. I think this deck actually, with Puppet Lock and just some other strategies, this deck still has some room to grow. Also, Super Poly's good in the format. So, the Snake Eye archetype is don't bother. It's being splashed in 1,000 different things. It's being played in Sinful Spoils is being played in Rescue A. Sinful Spoils is being put into Fire King, which we will talk about hopefully shortly. There we go. I forgot to add Fire King image to this tier list. But yes, Sinful Spoils is being splashed in a handful of things, but the actual Snake Eye deck, not so much. Flameberg Dragon, I believe, is also being played into Fire King. But Sinful Spoil, the actual Snake Eye deck, it's not that great. Chimera Horus, don't bother. This deck is not that great. Neither deck gets you into the other. Runick Chimera, it exists, it's playable, but it's by no means the best Runick variant in the format. Sword Soul, I think I put this in don't bother last time. I think Sword Soul's fine. Sword Soul puts up impressive boards, oppressive boards, and in some scenarios, it can actually do things that prevent your opponent from playing. The issue is, again, we've been seeing the same end board for like 2 years now from Sword Soul. But I think it's a decent rogue strategy. You could possibly take Sword Soul to a regional and probably top with it. Gold Pride Punk, I would put this in don't bother if it wasn't for the fact that I witnessed this deck kick some major ass at a case tournament. Now, I understand it's case tournament, so it's just a glorified locals. But this deck still does good things. Pep is an insane card that exists, and it sets up like 3-4 disruptions plus, whatever hand traps you have. I think it's a good rogue strategy for sure. Heroes, again, kind of a rogue strategy. The issue with heroes is they just don't have an Omni Negate, and I think negates right now are very, very important in the TCG format. The thing that heroes does well right now is that they floodgate with Dark Angel, being unable to activate spells. They can do Rivalry. They can summon Plasma, which is just skill drain. But they don't have any like actual Omni Negates on monsters, which I think right now is hurting the deck. Infernoble, this deck is still like top tier 1.5. This deck is still crazy. Sinful Spoils, Infernoble stuff does good things. It sets up really strong boards, very powerful boards. It's very good at breaking boards. Deck's crazy. And also, we're in a very fire dominant format right now, so this is very viable. Kashtira, I talked shit about Kashtira last tier list, I'm pretty sure. This deck is still crazy. Kashtira primarily just revolves around putting up a bunch of bodies and then like control Fenrir with Unicorn. Also, this format, since Rise Heart and like Diablosis and all that are banned, we're seeing a lot more people not running 2 copies of certain cards in their extra deck. So Unicorn is a lot more valuable, especially in those decks that can only run 1 Little Knight. You just Kashtira Unicorn, rip the Little Knight, and then you don't have to worry about that for the rest of the duel. Madolche, it's a rogue strategy. I think you could I genuinely think you could take Madolche to a regional, and as long as you're a good pilot, you could probably top with this. Now, I don't think you'll win the event, but you could top. You could, depending on how many people show up, you could get top like 48 or something like that. it's a very viable rogue strategy. I mean, at most any rank 4 deck is viable to be good. Vanadium, possibly tier 1, top of tier 1.5. This deck's crazy. This deck could technically Calamity Lock. They just don't revolve around doing it anymore. In fact, most of them don't even play it anymore. But this deck is still really powerful. Sets up really strong level 10 synchros, like Baron de Fleur, Borreload Savage Dragon, Dissipator. Just, it does really good stuff. It's also expensive. It's also very expensive. But also, you know, just Meek being, you know, a not once per turn tuner is fucking stupid. So, but tier 1.5, borderline tier 1. This deck is crazy. The only problem with this deck is it dies to Droll and Lockbird, and it has to pivot its play style when Shifter is active. I will die on this hill. Mathmech sucks until you bring Circular back to at least 2. Circular being at 1 is trash. Nouvelles, again, I love this deck, but it's trash. Nouvelles has seen more love since the Master Duels Ritual event. People have realized this deck actually does some things. It does some good things. Just, I don't think in the current format it has a home, but if the format has any drastic change anytime soon, there's a good chance this deck could be playable. This deck could be meta contending. The problem is the deck runs like 14 ritual monsters, which is half the deck almost. And then you have to rely off of seeing stuff to get to those ritual monsters, get the ritual spells. And unlike a lot of ritual decks, this deck just relies too much. It runs too many of the ritual monsters, too many of the ritual spells. You could see a hand of only spells or a hand of only monsters. It's a very bricky strategy. Pendulum, don't bother. I won't even care. So I forgot to update the image because this is just the tier list I used last time. So we're going to, instead of Pearly Dark World, we're going to pretend this is Pearly Sprite. Pearly Sprite saw some top 64 toppings at the YCS. I think the deck is very viable. Pearly Sprite being a very viable strategy because Pearly struggles a lot with a lot of hand trap disruptions, whereas the Sprites can play through that. The Sprites can also just primarily bait hand trap disruptions. And if your opponent doesn't have any of that, you just build a very oppressive board of Pearly plus Sprites. And they kind of have to just deal with it. It's 2 very good engines. And there's a reason that like running half of 2 different decks together is usually a good strategy, and it's because if they kill one engine, you could probably still run the other. So I don't think it's better than pure Pearly, but it's definitely up there. Plunder Adventure, that's a rogue strategy. Plunder's just not that great right now. As much as that pains me to say, Plunder is just not that great. It's not doing anything crazy. We're gonna ignore Pure Sprite. TG's bad, and then Marincess and Fire King. Marincess is a deck that just won't die. I think Marincess is like bottom of tier 2. This deck is still very good. It got some toppings at the YCS. It's doing the same stuff. Summons out some very beefy Marincess that's hard to get off the board because it's unaffected by shit. Basically summons a towers. Field spells crazy. The deck just been doing the same stuff and it still sees tops. Deck's crazy. Deck's strong. Fire Kings. This is the deck we've all been waiting for. I currently have a build for it for Fire King Tri Brigade because I don't have $400 for the Sinful Spoils engine. But the deck has already seen some top 64 toppings. I believe 4 toppings in the YCS Bologna. And it was all Sinful Spoils, of course, because that engine's insane. I think this deck is still very experimental, especially with the support that's coming out in Phantom Nightmare. This deck has potential to be very, very strong. And I'm going to put essentially both variants in tier 1.5. So like the Sinful Spoils or Tri Brigade. I guess Dogmatica is something that's also being run with this. I'm doing next week a deck profile on Fire King Tri Brigade, so be ready for that. I love this deck. This deck's actually really fun to play, especially with the Tri-Brigade stuff. I don't care about Sinful Spoils because, again, I don't have $400 for the engine. Yeah, that is it. Like I said, the format hasn't changed a whole lot. The top decks are still the top decks, and then everybody else is basically Rogue or Tier 2, however you want to say it. Like, everybody else is still Tier 2 or Tier 1, or sorry, Tier 2 or Rogue at this point. If you're not Tier 1, you're one of those two. But yeah, so let me know what you guys think in the comments down below, and I will see you all next week in next week's video. See ya.